Israel bombs another school in one of the worst attacks of its war on Gaza. Yet it says it will attend ceasefire talks brokered by the U.S., Qatar and Egypt next week. But Hamas has a new leader since the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. So what are the chances of a deal this time? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Each day, a new horror for the people of Gaza. The bombing of a school killing more than 100 Palestinians is the latest. Israeli bombs struck as renewed diplomatic efforts for negotiations are intensifying. Brokered by Qatar, Egypt and the United States, it's hoped that talks will resume this week. Previous attempts sought a ceasefire, the return of Israeli captives held in Gaza, and an exchange of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. But since the last major negotiations broke down, there have been big political changes. The head of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, has been elected its overall leader, replacing Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Tehran. And President Joe Biden is no longer in the U.S. presidential race, a contest now between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. So what are the chances of success for a renewed international diplomatic push for a ceasefire? And what are the biggest obstacles? We'll be discussing the situation with our guests shortly. First, though, this report from Imogen Kimber.
An Israeli attack on a school in Gaza kills more than 100 Palestinians during morning prayers. An airstrike launched as Qatar, Egypt and the United States call for another round of negotiations to end the violence that has killed more than 39,000 people and injured over 90,000 since October, and to stop the risk of a major regional war.
The expansion of the war has become a serious possibility if the international community and the concerned countries do not move immediately and effectively to stop the war crimes being committed by Israel.
But accusations of war crimes had no impact on a reception recently given to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the United States, where he met President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris and her rival presidential candidate, Donald Trump. He was given 50 standing ovations as he addressed Congress, no indication of any desire to halt Israel's war. And the chance of an escalation has increased since Israel assassinated a senior Hezbollah figure in Beirut and the head of Hamas's political wing and one of the group's main negotiators, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran. Many saw his killing as a major blow to the talks. According to media reports in Israel, Israeli negotiators believe Netanyahu is also stalling attempts at a ceasefire for political gain, as he faces calls to step down. Yet Israel has confirmed they will attend a new round scheduled for August the 15th. But now they will be negotiating with an organisation led by Yahya Sinwar. Formerly the head of Hamas in Gaza, Sinwar is widely considered hardline and believed to be the mastermind behind the attacks on southern Israel on October the 7th. Sinwar was previously imprisoned by Israel and has faced assassination attempts. On the table is likely to be an already established framework based on a three-stage ceasefire. In the United States, the presidential election campaign is intensifying, and Democrats are hoping if a ceasefire negotiated by President Joe Biden is agreed, it will help his vice president and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris's chance of winning. And with Biden being nicknamed Genocide Joe by critics over his role in supporting Israeli military during its war, Harris is also facing pressure. At this rally, protesters heckled her, forcing her to respond.
Now is the time to get a ceasefire deal and get the hostage deal done. Now is the time. And the president and I are working around the clock.
In Gaza, Palestinians suffering bombardment, displacement, hunger and disease can only wait to see if this latest attempt at a ceasefire becomes a reality. And with many nations alarmed over the threat of a regional war, a sense of urgency over the coming attempts to end the horror in Gaza is acute. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Ramallah is Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. From Tel Aviv is Gideon Levy, columnist with the Haaretz newspaper and author of the book The Punishment of Gaza. And from Boston is Rami Khouri, a political analyst and distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen for joining us. I want to start discussion with the exact same question to all three of you, which is, the mediators have been working on ceasefire negotiations since November without anything to show for it. Do you believe that this new push for a ceasefire can get somewhere? Mustafa, let's start with you.
No, I don't think it will get anywhere as long as Netanyahu and his fascist government are in power. And as long as the United States administration refuses to exercise any serious pressure on Israel, Netanyahu will continue his genocide in Gaza and will continue trying to push the region into a regional war. He is a very dangerous man, and he knows very well that the end of this war is the end of his political career.
Gideon?
Unfortunately, I couldn't agree more with my friend Dr. Barghouti, namely because the main obstacle is Netanyahu, and he did not change his mind. We will discuss it later, what are his motivations, but it's very clear he does not want a deal now and maybe not in any time. He wants this war to continue, and as long as this is the case, all the goodwill and all the mediators can continue to spread promises and requests. Nothing will change Netanyahu.
Rami, do you think there could be perhaps a deal at the end of this new push?
I agree with my friends and colleagues that we shouldn't expect anything to happen, given the reality of the Israeli government and the American government, who are the main obstacles. But I also, after 45 years of following this stuff, this issue closely, you always have to wait and see if anything changes down the road. The only thing that makes me want to kind of suspend judgment a little bit is the internal political situation here in the United States. We have an unprecedented situation where the Palestine issue, Gaza in particular, the Israeli genocide and the American funding of it and arming of it in particular, they are suddenly on the domestic political electoral map. We don't know if they will have an impact or not, but things are evolving very quickly in the domestic American political scene. And Gaza is, if it's not central, it's certainly a critical element in that changing environment. But the evidence of how the U.S. has behaved for the last 10 months and the last 40, 50 years suggests that we should not expect anything to happen, because the United States is enthusiastic about what Israel is doing in Gaza.
Okay, so listening to all three of you, you've mentioned Netanyahu, both Mustafa and Gideon have mentioned Netanyahu as an obstacle to peace. And all three of you, I believe, have mentioned how important the U.S. role is here. So let's start with Netanyahu. We have to cover both anyway, but let's start with Netanyahu. Mustafa, you see no change in his position, policy, or inclination to negotiate since the beginning of this war, correct?
Absolutely not. On the contrary, he is more determined to continue his policy, especially after the improvement of his status in electoral polls. I think he's relying on the fact that not only he has a fascist government, but the Israeli society itself is moving, unfortunately, in the direction of fascism. And the fact that 69% of the people who participated in a recent poll said that they support assassination of Palestinian and Lebanese leaders, even if that blocks the possibility of getting back the Israeli prisoners, is an indication of that. More than that, I think Netanyahu is implementing a strategy he has been talking about for decades. He wants genocide because he wants ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The only explanation of his policy in Gaza is that he still hopes and dreams about ethnic cleansing of the whole population of Gaza by making Gaza unlivable. Today's terrible massacre that the Israeli army committed in one of the shelters, one of the schools, 1 out of 80 schools that were attacked in the same manner, is a very clear indication of that. But more than that, Netanyahu still hopes that he will push the United States into a war with Iran. He wants to destroy Iran through a war in which the United States itself will do the work. This is his dream, and unfortunately, the United States administration is doing nothing to stop him from this very dangerous course.
You mentioned at the beginning of your answer Netanyahu's improving status in polls. And Gideon, that is something I wanted to ask you. I was quite surprised when I researched this conversation, right, preparing for this show, to see that just a day ago, Israeli press published a poll in which Netanyahu is now ahead of Benny Gantz, first time, I believe, since October 7th, and his Likud party, if elections were held today or tomorrow, according to this poll, which was published in Maariv, Likud would be the #1 party in Israel.
All this teaches you, Cyril, that it's the story of Israel, not the story of Netanyahu. The support of Netanyahu, and even the protest, the boundaries of the Israeli protest, which was quite devoted and quite powerful for a while, but it had very, very clear borders, and it never crossed them, almost never crossed them. Namely, we don't oppose the war, we don't condemn the crimes, we don't protest against the mass killings, we don't protest against the starvation and the destruction. All those things create a situation in which Netanyahu does not have a real alternative. In the outside the world, people only think that once we'll get rid of Netanyahu, Israel will turn into the paradise that we used to dream about. No, my friends, Israel is, by its vast majority, supporting what's happening in Gaza and standing behind it. It is true that Netanyahu makes it worse, but do you think that any alternative will do it differently? I have my doubts, and as Mustafa just mentioned, there were some evidences for this recently. In any case, Netanyahu is Israel, and Israel is Netanyahu when it comes to the war, when it comes to the apartheid, and when it comes to the occupation. It is different when it comes to tactical questions, to questions of manners, the question of his behavior, but this is irrelevant. What we face here is quite a one front of Israel wanting this war to continue, and this is unbelievable and unprecedented.
So, Rami, then, let's take it over to you. We have both Mustafa and Gideon telling us that Netanyahu is an obstacle to peace, and he pretty much has Israeli society, broadly speaking, behind him, even in light of the anti-government protests that we saw that lasted for months. Even in light of that, Netanyahu is actually improving in terms of his popularity, his electoral outlook, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So what is there anything that could compel Netanyahu to change his stance then?
In theory, yes, intense pressure from the United States to cut off arms, go to the ICC, do all these terrible things that are terrible for Israel, but that are good for the rule of law and for righteous behavior by human rights obeying citizens all around the world. But that's not going to happen. The United States was making small little rhetorical adjustments, mainly Kamala Harris saying softer things, at the same time saying Israel has the right to defend itself. But the problem here is deeper than even, I would say, than what Mustafa and Gideon are saying, and I know they agree with me, but the problem is Zionism. That Zionism has always wanted to achieve these goals. Get the Palestinians out, create a Jewish state, and then see what happens. This has always been the Zionist philosophy, and they see a chance of achieving it now. They're going ahead with it in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem and everywhere. And the world is doing almost nothing. It's quite extraordinary. So the conclusion is that the majority of Israelis support this Zionist, genocidal, apartheid, racist, colonial takeover of all Palestine with extreme brutality to civilians. And the parallel conclusion is the Western democratic free world, as they call themselves, are eagerly supporting this. They're doing nothing to stop it. There can be no other
Rami, can I jump in
from the evidence.
Rami, can I jump in for a second? Because you say the root cause of this is the underpinning beliefs of Zionism. But I want to push back against that just a little bit, because there are movements within Zionism. I think almost everybody on the Israeli political stage would call themselves Zionists, but they don't all believe the same thing. And they don't all believe that Palestinians should be dealt with in the same way. So, Gideon, perhaps I take this to you. Do you agree with what Rami was saying, that really the root cause of this is Zionism?
Yes, I feel myself agreeing too much here, but no other choice. But there are nuances, and I want to elaborate on this. There are the right-wingers who admit that they are fascists, who admit that Zionism is only about Jewish supremacy, who admit that the Palestinians have no rights whatsoever between the river and the sea, and who admit that their vision is to somehow either get rid of the Palestinians or leave them in the same status without any rights. On the other side, the other camp, what we call the leftist Zionists or the Zionist left or the central left, they are more sophisticated, and therefore I see them as more disturbing because they cover it up. They don't admit it. They want to occupy softly. They want to make it in a friendly way. They would meet again and again with Abbas in endless peace conferences. They would declare that they are in favor of the two-state solution, even though they know that there are no chances anymore for any viable Palestinian state. They will promise the Americans that they are people of peace, and they will not stop talking about peace and continuing to occupy exactly like the right-wingers, only in a softer way. And you choose which one of those two you prefer, the one where what you see is what you get, or the one who mislead you now for decades and decades, promising all kinds of promises and doing nothing.
We need to reopen the chapter of the U.S. and American pressure. Rami signaled at the beginning, and so did Mustafa, how important this was. It's not breaking news. We've been saying for months that really the only country that has any real significant leverage over Israel is the U.S. We also know that the U.S. continues to fund Israel. Mustafa pointed out that they've just released another $3.5 billion worth of military funding for Israel in its war effort. They're also obviously also selling the weapons and providing weapons. Rami, you're saying that there are rhetorical, very minor differences between Biden, Harris, and under the Democratic tent in the U.S. Is there any reason to believe the U.S. is going to change its policy anytime soon?
The quick answer is no. There's no evidence. All we have are little hints, small little nuanced changes in tone from Kamala Harris and her vice presidential pick, and things like that. But what we do have for the first time ever is a Democratic Party that is very scared that its Gaza policy, supporting the genocide and doing nothing to pressure Israel into a ceasefire, may cost it losing a couple of swing states, especially Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and this is what they're terrified of. We don't know if this is going to happen, because the trouble now is that there are so many new emotional dimensions of what's going on, especially with the new Democratic candidates, that there's a bit of euphoria, and this will die down in a week or so. The convention of the Democrats is coming up 19 to 22 August. The key signs will come out of that convention. If there are elements in the program, the platform that Kamala Harris puts in, because she then can control the Democratic Party's position. She can't do that now. This is one of her weaknesses. But if there are real changes talking about arms embargo, holding up aid, going to the ICC, implementing the American laws about you can't sell arms to people who deny other people's human rights. These are all clear Israeli violations of U.S. and international law. If there are any clear signs, they're going to come out in the Democratic platform. We shouldn't expect anything before August 22. But the other thing that's fascinating is public opinion.
So Rami, let's
evolving.
pause that for a second, because that raises an obvious question, and maybe I'll ask this one to Mustafa. If the U.S., and if you, provided you agree with this premise, that the U.S. isn't about to change its policy in any major way in the short term, if that is so, why did the U.S. table once again a new push for a ceasefire if it knows it is not going to compel Israel to agree to one?
Well, before I answer your question, I have to make one comment about what was said before, which is that I totally agree that we will not see peace in this region without the ending of the settler colonial Zionist project. And that you cannot be a Zionist and be Democrat. You cannot be a Zionist and be called left. That's impossible, because Zionism means racism. And what we see here is different levels of racism, but it's all racist. It's racist because these people don't believe that Palestinians have the right to be in their own country. And they don't believe that Palestinians have the right for freedom. And they don't believe that Palestinians have the right to be equal. Now, talking about the new push, of course, the United States would prefer if this war could end without upsetting Israel. And maybe they hope through this kind of action to achieve something, some kind of pressure on the Palestinian side to accept Israeli conditions, which is, of course, impossible. But on the other hand, I must say that this is not going to stop Israel. United States will not go in the direction of imposing sanctions on Israel. And without sanctions on Israel, nothing will change. But there are factors that will push Israel. The first factor is the fact that it is failing in achieving its military goals. The fact that it is failing in eliminating Palestinian resistance. The fact that it is failing in imposing its control on Gaza. The fact that they are also suffering from huge human losses, the largest ever, I mean, with the exception of maybe 1973 war, they have had thousands of people who are injured or killed. This is a factor, but the other very important factor is that Israeli economy is now suffering from very serious damage. And I think everybody knows now that Israel has very big deficit, that the cost of this war will reach something like $70 billion, that major parts of the Israeli economy are falling apart, and there is a risk of a regional war, which is not going to be a picnic for the Israeli society.
They do have U.S. funding, so perhaps the economic concerns and economic fears might be allayed by that.
No, because the United States has already given Israel, with this new package, $23.5 billion for military equipment and weapons. I don't think that the United States is ready to give them $50 billion to fix the economy. I don't think so. And I think this will have very serious impact on the Israeli side. But at the end of the day, we have to say that the real goal. If we want Israel to change, if we want to stop this genocide, if we want to stop these terrible war crimes that are happening on the ground, the world must impose sanctions on Israel, must impose boycott on Israel. Israel's case today is no different from the apartheid system that was in South Africa at one point of time, and Israel is now even practicing a much worse apartheid. So what we need is sanctions, what we need is boycott. And that is the only language that Israel will understand in terms of international behavior.
We have 4 minutes left. I want to make sure we discuss the last part of it. As I see it, there are three main things. We've discussed Israel, we've discussed the U.S., their positions, what's changing and what's not changing, more importantly. We haven't discussed Hamas. Mustafa, back to you on this. What's victory? What does victory look like for Yahya Sinwar, the new overall leader of Hamas?
I think for Sinwar, victory was achieved on the 7th of October. And for him now...
But I mean now, given that we're talking about this renewed push for a ceasefire.
What he wants is ceasefire. I think that's what Palestinian movement wants, ceasefire to stop the suffering of the people. Don't forget, Israel has killed already 50,000 Palestinians, including 10,000 who are under the rubble. We have 93,000 injured people, many of whom will die because Israel has destroyed the whole medical infrastructure. People are suffering from lack of food. People are suffering from horrible humanitarian conditions. Israel is now conducting biological warfare on the people of Gaza. We have 72,000 cases of infectious hepatitis. We have cases of meningitis. We could see cholera tomorrow. We could see even poliomyelitis. So it's a very dangerous situation. The end of the war is the demand. And that's what everybody wants, including Sinwar. The end of the war, withdrawal of Israeli army from Gaza, and allowing us to fix this horrible, horrible disaster that Israel has caused. The worst man-made humanitarian crisis ever.
Gideon, this may sound like a bit of a strange question, but Israel publicly, officially wants to kill Sinwar, much like it killed Ismail Haniyeh. Do Israelis see a contradiction in the fact that we're talking about ceasefire negotiations, and we all know Israel wants to kill the negotiator on the other side?
First of all, it killed already. You don't have to go far. Ismail Haniyeh was a negotiator, and Israel killed him, which might be one of the most foolish actions that Israel had ever done, not to speak about lack of legitimacy, because by the end of the day, Haniyeh was not an armed person. I'm not sure he ever held a gun in his life. But in any case, Israel killed him. And Israel wants to kill Sinwar because for Israel, assassinations is a policy clouded by most of the Israelis, supported by most of the Israelis who are really enthusiastic about those assassinations. It reminds them the James Bond films, and they never ask about the consequences of those assassinations. So an average Israeli will not see any contradiction. Today we negotiate with Sinwar, and tomorrow we'll kill him, and it will be legitimate.
Rami, last words?
The Israelis, since the 1930s, have killed British officials, Palestinian national leaders. They killed PLO leaders. They've killed anybody that they feel is challenging them in Palestine. And they will keep killing as long as they need to, if nobody stops them. But all the killings have only brought Israel to the most dangerous position of its life in the last century. It's now surrounded by 5 or 6 non-state militant Arab actors, armed actors who are very powerful, more powerful than any of the Arab countries that fought Israel. Israel is being isolated around the world. The U.S. support for it is declining steadily, even among Jews. So it's in the worst position it's ever been, and all it does is keep doing what it knows how to do. Get the Palestinians out of Palestine, kill them, incarcerate them, lay siege to them, imprison them, torture them, do all the terrible things, and they'll keep doing it as long as nobody stops them with the same results. That's why there has to be a massive international intervention in a political manner that defines and contains Zionism. We've accepted to live with a Jewish majority Israeli state many times. Palestinians have, the Arabs have, the Islamic world has. They're not interested. The Zionist philosophy, and the fascinating thing is the Zionist philosophy didn't start with Jews. It started with Christian fundamentalist extremists in England and the United States in the 1860s, even before Herzl and the idea of Zionism. So we have to get to the core of this issue, which is the collusion between Western powers and Zionist forces to create this zombie killing machine, this unleashed Frankenstein monster of death that Israel has become. And we see all these pictures every day, children without heads and feet without bodies, and nobody's stopping it. So there has to be a decisive moment when this stops and we shift to trying to live in peace with everybody, inshallah.
And that is the time we have for today. I want to thank all our guests, Mustafa Barghouti, Gideon Levy, and Rami Khouri. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.